stories are the backbone of our culture, and there are some stories that seem to linger, taking on different forms, being passed from generation to generation, voice to voice, being told and retold, because they have something very important to tell. One of these stories, which we now call Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, has survived over 800 years of history. We have the original manuscript from it, from its unknown author, and over the centuries it has been reinterpreted and retranslated by hundreds of different authors, including the likes of J.R.R. Tolkien. And we're in luck because this story takes place at Christmas time, which makes it the perfect cozy Christmas time reading. So how about you get cozy, grab a blanket, perhaps a warm drink. This is my extra special recipe for hot chocolate. I make my own mix, and I will be posting the recipe to my Patreon if you're interested in that. And come and gather by my incredibly artificial fireside in order to enjoy the tale of Tolkien's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. This is a story that I believe deserves a little bit of introduction because it is not only a good story, but also a piece of history, a scholarly text that truly deserves to be studied. Now, it's important to note that most versions of this story that you're going to see nowadays are translations of the original, because the original sounds like this. Sithen the Seja and the assault what says at Troy, the bog Britanid and Brent to Brondage and Askis. The tulk that the Tramis of Treason there rocked was tried for his treachery, the truest on earth. Now, in all likelihood, I'm sure you recognized a couple of words and phrases from that, treachery, the truest treason on earth. And that's because this was written in Middle English. It's also what Chaucer wrote in. It's around the 14th and 15th century. It's the predecessor to modern English, which we consider kind of like Shakespeare and onwards, so it becomes more and more recognizable as time passes. Old English, which something like Beowulf is written in, will be even more unrecognizable than that. So then it becomes necessary to have a translation. And translations are really tricky for a work like this because it is poetry. The entire story is written in verse, and so when you translate it from that verse, you could lose a lot of the original poetic intent. Luckily, Tolkien was in a very good place to give a go at this translation. He was a philologist, a philosopher and studier of language with a focus on older forms of English. And so he worked on translating this story for a very long time. The version that we see today was not published by Tolkien in his lifetime. Instead, this was compiled by Christopher Tolkien and other editors from his scattered notes. And so there may have been some lines, if Tolkien had had an eternity, that he would have fiddled around with or changed, but for the most part, this translation will be as Tolkien, we believe, intended it. You may have noticed, even just from that introductory section that I read in the original language, that despite what we would usually consider verse, nothing in that really rhymed. I'll give you the first two lines again. Sithen de Seja and the assault what says at Troy, the borg Britanid and Brent to Brondage and Askis. So Troy, the ancient Greek city of Troy, and Askis certainly don't rhyme, neither do Rokt and Earth, the other two ending words. Critical readers will notice that there is a lot of alliteration, the borg Britanid and Brent to Brondage and Askis. And that is because, as I learned while researching for this video, using rhyme in poetry and verse is a distinctly French invention. It was something that was incorporated into English poetry later on, but before that, they placed much more importance on alliteration. So you're gonna see as we read this version that Tolkien was really seeking for that alliteration to put back into his translation in order to maintain some of the original poetic integrity. It's also key to note that in any translation of a work, there's going to be bias in how the story ends up being told. Tolkien, for example, wanted this story to tell a certain Christian moral message, and we'll get a little bit more into what kind of moral message he was trying to tell in the analysis portion as we go through. But if you do want to get the truest version of this story, it's important to maybe take in other translations. So this isn't the only set in stone version of the story. The Armitage translation, which I've also read, is fabulous and much more contemporary than Tolkien's rather flowery style of writing for this. So if you want to read a different version, go ahead and check them out. There's tons of translations on the internet, and I highly recommend that you read all of those if you want the most well-rounded version of this story with as little bias as possible. Now, we've been talking a lot about Tolkien in this introduction, but we should also talk about the original author, which is a little bit difficult because we don't know who that was. We know he was writing in the 14th century, I believe in the northern part of England, but he also wrote The Pearl, which Tolkien has a translation for in this, and that's a note falling out of my book, don't worry about that. So pretty much all that we can ascertain about the author comes from his writings, from what we can learn about him and his station and his thoughts on morality or philosophy, kind of comes from this. So I say that we just get into this and get to know the original author and Tolkien a little bit better as we journey through this tale. I'm going to be abridging things slightly as we go, but I will try to maintain as much poetic integrity from this as I possibly can. We begin setting the scene for this Arthurian tale in a rather interesting place. When the siege and the assault had ceased at Troy, and the fortress fell in flame to firebrands and ashes, the traitor who the contrivance of treason there fashioned was tried for his treachery, the most true upon earth. So we start in Troy, not in England. It doesn't really matter what he's describing. It's things from the Iliad and the Odyssey. You guys, you know, the old Greek tales. But the author did this for a very important reason, because a lot of English literature in the medieval era wanted to draw this connection back to Troy, to the old Greek epics, because it made them feel like their culture was coming from somewhere. They wanted to act like they are the descendants of these great folk heroes in order to kind of legitimize the story that they're telling. So they're saying, our story begins at Troy when the fires had finally ceased and the whole city was burnt down to ashes, and that has led us to the court of Arthur today. It's drawing a stronger lineage than there is that we know of in order to legitimize the story that they're telling. And a lot of medieval stories do this, and Sir Gawain is one of them. A note on pronunciation. I'm pronouncing it Gawain, Gawain, Gawain. There's lots of ways to pronounce it. Nobody seems to have a consensus on what is correct, so we're gonna do what we can. So at the end of this passage, as we trace our lineage up to Arthur, it says, "If you will listen to this lay but a little while now, I will tell it at once, as in town I have heard it told, as it is fixed and fettered, in story brave and bold, thus linked and truly lettered, as was loved in this land of old." So you'll notice there's a little bit of rhyme at the end of each of these long passages of non-rhyming verse. We have something that is called the bob and wheel, and the bob is a short, I believe, usually 2-syllable section. So I will tell it at once, as in town I have heard it told is a new line, and then we have the wheel, this very rhythmic rhyming section to finish off each line. As it is fixed and fettered in a story brave and bold, thus linked and truly lettered, as was loved in this land of old. And Tolkien does a beautiful job of maintaining those. This king lay at Camelot at Christmas tide, with many a lovely lord, lieges most noble. Indeed, of the Round Table, all those tried brethren, amid merriment unmatched and mirth without care, there tourneyed many a time the trusty knights, and jousted full joyously these gentle lords. Then to the court they came at carols to play, for there the feast was unfailing, full 15 days, with all meats and all mirth that men could devise, such gladness and gaiety as was glorious to hear, din of voices by day and dancing by night, all happiness at the highest halls and in bowers, had the lord and the ladies, such as they loved most dearly, with all the bliss of this world they abode together. So this sets the scene at Camelot at Christmas time, and the way they did Christmas was with a 15-day feast, going from Christmas to New Year's, and during that time they would feast and play games, and the women were beautiful and the men were noble, and King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table were the most noble knights in the entire land. Later on he makes mention of the Queen Guinevere, that loveliest lady there, on them glanced with eyes of grey, that he found ever one more fair, in sooth might no man say. So Guinevere is the most beautiful and queenly queen in the land. They also then mention there good Gawain was set at Guinevere's side, and they say that he is the Lord's sister's son, so he's King Arthur's nephew, and he is a very loyal-hearted knight. And while they're all enjoying this feast, there's one man who has not yet started to eat, and that is King Arthur, because he has a tradition where he won't begin the Christmas feast until he hears a story that impresses him. So they're waiting for somebody to tell him an incredible story about an amazing feat that they performed so that they can begin the feast. Now of their service I will say nothing more, for you are all well aware that no want would there be. Another noise that was new drew near on a sudden, so that their lord might have leave at last to take food. For hardly had the music but a moment ended, and the first course in the court was as custom been served, when there passed through the portals a perilous horseman, the mightiest on Middle Earth in measure of height. That's Middle Earth as in Midgard, the Norse term for Earth, not Middle Earth as in Tolkien's Middle Earth. From his gorge to his girdle, so great and so square, we're describing the knight, and his loins and his limbs so long and so huge, that half a troll upon earth I trow that he was, but the largest man alive, at least I declare him, and yet the seemliest for his size that could sit on a horse, for though in back and in breast his body was grim, both his paunch and his waist were properly slight, and all his features followed his fashion so gay in mode, for at the hue men gaped aghast, in his face and form that showed, as a fey man he fell past, and green all over glowed. So all of a sudden as they're feasting, this hunk of a man bursts through the door on horseback, and he's beautiful and shapely and super buff, but still slim in the right places, and most importantly, I would argue, he's green. They go on to describe that his garments are green, so is his horse, his hair is green, his skin is green. Such a mount on Middle Earth or man to ride him was never beheld in that hall with eyes ere that time, for there his glance was as lightning bright, so did all that saw him swear. No man would have the might, they thought, his blows to bear. So not only is he buff, is he beautiful, is he and his horse green, but he's also really scary. And if anybody tried to go into combat with him, chances are not looking good for that guy. And yet he had not a helm, nor hauberk either, not a pisane, not a plate that was proper to arms, not a shield, not a shaft for shock or for blow, but in his one hand he held a holly bundle, and the holly bundle, the holly stem, is a sign of peace, kind of like an olive branch as we know it today. And an axe in the other, ugly and monstrous, a ruthless weapon aright for one in rhyme to describe. Of course he then goes on to describe it, a branch of green steel of beaten gold, the bit burnished bright and broad at the edge. Such was he now, hastened in, the hall entering, pressing forward to the dais, no peril he feared. To none gave he greeting, gazing above them, and the first word that he winged, "Now where is," he said, "the governor of this gathering?" Take me to your leader, basically. For gladly I would on the same set my sight, and with himself no talk in town. On the courtiers he cast his eye, and rolled it up and down. He stopped and stared to espy, who there had most renown. So this bright green knight storms in and asks to speak to their leader, to the king. And everyone is looking on confused, wondering, why he's here, whether he's a threat, and, why he's green, most importantly. And they're all wondering whether this newcomer is something fey, something magical. Then Arthur before the high dais beheld this wonder, and freely with fair words, for fearless was he ever, saluted him, saying, "Lord, to this lodging thou art welcome. The head of this household, Arthur, my name is. Alight as thou lovest me, and linger, I prithee." "Nay, so help me," quoth the horseman. "He that on high is enthroned, to pass any time in this place was no part of my errand. But since thy praises, prince, so proud are uplifted, and thy castle and courtier are accounted the best, 'tis that has fetched me hither, by my faith, at this time." Arthur invites him to sit down and feast with them, and the Green Knight says no, he's not there to feast, he's just there because he's heard of the reputation of Arthur and his court. The knight tries to put them at ease, saying that he's there for peace and not to fight, but he is there for a game. Then Arthur answered there, and said, "Sir noble knight, if battle thou seek thus bear, thou'lt fail not here to fight. Nay, I wish for no warfare, on my word I tell thee. Hereabout on these benches are but beardless children, where I hasped in armor on a high charger, there is no man here to match me." Just calling all of the knights there at the round table, the best of the best, saying that there's no way they could beat him. "And so I crave in this courtly only a Christmas pastime, since it is Yule and New Year, and you are young here and merry. If any so bold in this house here holds that he is, if so bold be his blood, or his brain be so wild, that he stoutly dare strike one stroke for another, then I will give him, as my gift, this guisarme costly, This axe, 'tis heavy enough to handle as he pleases. I will abide the first brunt, here bear as I sit. If any fellow be so fierce as my faith to test, hither let him haste to me, and lay hold of this weapon. I hand it over forever, he can have it as his own, and I will stand a stroke from him, stock still on this floor, provided thou'lt lay down this law, that I may deliver him another, claim I, and yet a respite I'll allow, till a year and a day go by. Come quick, and let's see now, if any here dare reply. So here the knight is offering his game. He will give any knight who is bold enough to strike him his beautiful, beautiful axe. Indeed, he'll hand it over now, and they can have it forever, and strike one blow upon him using that axe. But the deal is that a year and a day from that day, so this is taking place on New Year's Eve, so on New Year's Day the next year, he's going to be allowed to return that blow. It is quite a strange deal, and although beheading games occasionally happened in medieval society, which I think is a little bit horrifying, all the knights are silent and afraid of this man who seems impossibly powerful. If he astounded them at first, yet stiller were then all the household in the hall, both high men and low. The man on his mount moved in his saddle, and rudely his red eyes he rolled them about, bent his bristling brow all brilliantly green, and swept round his beard to see who would rise. When none in converse would accost him, he coughed then loudly, stretched himself haughtily, and straightway exclaimed, "What, is this Arthur's house?" he said thereupon, "the rumour of which runs through realms unnumbered. Where now is your haughtiness and your high conquests, your fierceness and fell mood and your fine boasting? Now are the revels and the royalty of the Round Table overwhelmed by a word by one man spoken? For all the blench now abashed ere a blow is offered." With that he laughed so loud that their lord was angered. The blood shot for shame into his shining cheeks and face. As wroth as wind he grew, and so did all in that place. Then near the stout man drew the king of the fearless race. He's calling them cowards, saying that, oh, you're meant to be the bravest knights in the land, and yet none of you will face me. And of course, King Arthur stands up, ready to strike a blow and defend his honor. And Arthur takes the deal from the knight, but of course, as is tradition, he looks around to see if a knight of his court will take this responsibility for him. From beside the Queen Gawain to the king did then incline, I implore with prayer plain, that this match should now be mine. It seems like the noble nephew Gawain will be taking the deal. Also important to note that as much as the pronunciation of Gawain can shift in order to match a specific rhyme, Tolkien also sometimes interchanges W for G because they were the same character in medieval writing, and so in order to make alliteration, sometimes he will call Gawain Wowin. It's something that doesn't translate super well, but if you hear me saying Wowin instead of Gawain, I'm not just having a brain fart. That's what's written, I promise. "Would you, my worthy lord," said Wowin to the king, "bid me abandon this bench and stand by you there, so that I without discourtesy might be excused from the table. And my liege lady, you were not loth to permit me. I would come to your council before your courtiers fair. For I find it unfitting, as in fact it is held, when a challenge in your chamber makes choice so exalted, though you yourself be desirous to accept it in person, while many bold men about you on benches are seated. On earth there are, I hold, none more honest of purpose, no figures fair on field where fighting is waged. I am weakest, I am aware, and in wit feeblest, and the least loss if I live not, if one would learn the truth. Only because you are my uncle is honor given me. Save your blood in my body, I boast of no virtue, and since this affair is so foolish that no wise befits you, and I have requested it first, accord it then to me. If my claim is uncalled for, without cavil shall judge this court." Gawain is claiming that he is the dumbest, least virtuous, least proven knight in the court. So if this dumb deal is gonna happen, it should be him that takes it, not King Arthur, which is a little self-deprecating, but, you know, what are you gonna do? The king then commanded that he quickly should rise, and he readily uprose and directly approached, kneeling humbly before his highness, and laying hand on the weapon, and he lovingly relinquished it, and lifting his hand, gave him God's blessing, and graciously enjoined him that his hand and his heart should be hearty alike. "Take care, cousin," quoth the king, "one cut to address. If thou learnest him this lesson, I believe very well that thou wilt bear any blow that he gives back later." So the king tells him to do it in one blow, because if you do it well enough, he's probably not going to be able to hit back, which is probably good advice, maybe. Gawain goes to the great man with Gizem in hand, and he boldly abides there, he blenched not at all. Then next said to Gawain the knight all in green, let's tell again our agreement, ere we go any further. I'd know first, sir knight, thy name, I entreat thee, to tell me truly, if I may trust in thy word. In good faith, quoth the good knight, I, Gawain, am called, who bring thee this buffet, let be what may follow. And at this time a 12-month, in thy turn have another, with whatever weapon thou wilt, and in the world with none else but me. The other man answered again, I am passing pleased, said he, upon my life, Sir Gawain, that this stroke should be struck by thee. They have repeated the terms of the deal and confirmed it, and now it's gonna happen. He gets to strike one blow upon the Green Knight, and then a year from now, the Green Knight gets to strike him one blow. The Green Knight on the ground now gets himself ready. Leaning a little with the head, he lays bare the flesh, and his locks long and lovely he lifts over his crown, letting the naked neck, as was needed, appear, his left foot on the floor before him placing. Gawain gripped on his axe, gathered and raised it. From aloft let it swiftly land where 'twas naked, so that the sharp of his blade shivered the bones, and sank clean through the clear fat and clove it asunder, and the blade of the bright steel then bit into the ground. The fair head fell to the floor from the shoulders, and folk fended it with their feet as forth it went rolling. The blood burst from the body bright on the greenness, and yet neither faltered nor fell the fierce man at all, after being decapitated, but stoutly he strode forth, still strong on his shanks, and roughly he reached out among the rows that stood there, caught up his comely head, and quickly upraised it, and then hastened to his horse, laid hold of the bridle, stepped into the stirrup iron, and strode up aloft, his head by the hair in his hand holding, and he settled himself then in the saddle as firmly as if unharmed by mishap, though in the hall he might wear no head. His trunk he twisted round, that gruesome body that bled, and many fear then found, as soon as his speech was sped. Gawain decapitated him, and the Green Knight stood up, picked up his head, and got on his horse, and is now holding his head by the hair. This is not good for Gawain, who gets to have this blow returned in a year. This is really bad, about as bad as it can get. For the head in his hand, he held it up straight. Toward the fairest at the table, he twisted the face. It lifted up its eyelids and looked at them broadly, and made such words with his mouth as may be recounted. See thou get ready, Gawain, to go as thou vowest, and as faithfully seek till thou find me, good sir, as thou hast promised this place in the presence of these knights. To the Green Chapel go thou, and get thee, I charge thee, such a dint as thou hast dealt. Indeed, thou hast earned a nimble knock in return on New Year's morning. The Knight of the Green Chapel, I am known to many, so if to find me thou endeavour, thou fail not to do so. Therefore come, or be called a craven thou deservest. With a rude roar and a rush, his reins he turned then, and hastened through the hall door with his head in his hand. And fire of the flint flew from the feet of his charger. To what country he came in that court no man knew, no more than they learned from what land he had journeyed. So everyone's having a fair response, which is a little bit of horror. The knight has basically given Gawain his home address, and said, see ya in a year and a day, and headed off. Meanwhile, the king and Sir Gawain at the green man laugh and smile, yet to men had appeared 'twas plain, a marvel beyond denial. Gawain and the king are, laughing this one off, which is a bold move because everyone else in the hall is kind of horrified at the things that they've seen. Though Arthur the High King in his heart marveled, he let no sight of it be seen, but said then aloud to the queen so comely with courteous words, Dear lady, today be not downcast at all. Such cunning play well becomes the Christmas tide. So the king says, everyone lighten up a little bit. It's a Christmas game. 'Tis the season for Christmas games. They hang up the axe that Gawain has won, and it becomes a story that they tell. Do you remember that time at Christmas when a Green Knight came in, we cut off his head, and then he told Gawain that he was going to do the same thing to him in a year? It's a really fun story. And so they brush it off and keep partying. Things continue. The seasons pass. And Gawain and Arthur and everyone else who saw that is left wondering how much of that was real. Could it have just been a dream? Maybe. I'm sure Gawain certainly wishes it was. Until the Michaelmas moon has winter's boding brought, Sir Gawain then full soon of his grievous journey thought. By the time the end of September comes around at Michaelmas, Gawain begins thinking towards his journey and the promise that he's made. He asks Arthur if he can leave to go on this quest, and he says yes, with some hesitancy. Much mournful lament was made in the hall, that one so worthy as Gawain should wend on that errand, to endure a deadly dint and deal no more with blade. The king ever made good cheer, saying, why should I be dismayed? Of doom the fair or drear, by a man must be essayed. Everyone's a little worried because they think Gawain's going to die, which is fair considering the circumstances, but Arthur's like, nah, it'll be fine. So they dress him up in the most fine and beautiful armor that they can find him. He gets a mass said for him. He arms his horse Gringolet, who is the true hero of this story, I dare say. And among the armor pieces, they also bring him, I believe it's a shield that has a pentangle upon it. We will put the pentangle here. This story is the first usage of the word pentangle, which I believe becomes our pentacle in modern English. But in this story, the pentangle, as they call it, takes on a very particular significance. Then they brought him his blazon that was of brilliant jewels, with the pentangle depicted in pure hue of gold. And why the pentangle is proper to that prince so noble, I intend now to tell you, though it may tarry my story. He goes on to talk about how important the symbol of the pentangle is, that in other English-speaking places it is also called the endless knot. So it suits well this knight and his unsullied arms, for ever faithful in 5 points, and 5 times under each, Gawain as good was acknowledged, and as gold refined, devoid of every vice, and with virtues adorned. The pentangle acts as a symbol of all of Gawain's interconnected virtues, and they go on to describe what those 5 virtues are, the 5 on 5. Gawain has very sharp senses. All 5 of his senses are sharp and ready to go. He also has the use of all 5 of his fingers. He's very nimble, very skilled in battle and conflict. He's also deeply faithful, as represented by the 5 wounds of Christ, the stigmata, which was 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, that's 3, 4. I don't know exactly how they count it. Would it be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? 5? The mailman's here. That was scary. There's also the 5 joys of Mary, such as the Nativity, the Assumption, the Ascension, the Resurrection. And then there are the 5 knightly virtues, like chastity, chivalry, and piety. So he has 5 sets of 5 positive virtues, things that are central to him, and so on the shield is his pentangle. And armed up, he is ready to go out and try to find this Green Knight. He spurned his steed with the spurs and sprang on his way, so fiercely that the flint sparks flashed out behind him. All who beheld him so honorable in their hearts were sighing, and assenting in sooth one said to another, grieving for that good man, before God 'tis a shame that thou Lord must be lost, who art in life so noble, to meet his match among men. Marry, 'tis not easy. It's interesting that Gawain thinks so lowly of himself. He thinks he is the worst knight in King Arthur's court and the lamest, and he's never made a name for himself. But also everybody there adores him and loves him and doesn't want to see him die. So it's possible he's a little bit too pious, if that's possible. But hey, he's a really good guy. That's what we should get from this whole section, is that Gawain is a really solid dude in every way. All 5 ways. Thus, Gawain's journey to the Green Chapel begins. The knight didn't really tell him where the Green Chapel is, so it's a bit of a rough trip, but he is on his way with only his horse for company, Gringolet. The knight took pathways strange by many a lonesome lea, and oft his view did change, that chapel ere he could see. We get very little detail of this journey, but he faces a lot of dangers. There's mention of giants. He might even go all the way up to Wales, and it's cold and miserable. Had he not been stalwart and staunch and steadfast in God, he doubtless would have died, and death had met him often. For though war wearied him much, the winter was worse, when the cold clear water from the clouds spilling froze ere it had fallen upon the faded earth. The knight did at that tide his plaint to Mary plead, her rider's road to guide, and some lodging lead. So he's praying for somewhere to stay, and after he does the sign of the cross thrice upon him, ere a mansion he marked within a moat in the forest, on a low mound above a lawn, laced under the branches of many burly bull running about by the ditches. He found a castle, after begging for lodging, so it seems that his prayers have been answered. Gawain from the one side gazed on the stronghold, as it shimmered and shone through the shining oaks, and then humbly he doffed his helm, and with honor he thanked Jesus and St. Julian, who are generous both, who had courtesy accorded him, and to his cry hearkened. The gallant knight on his great horse good enough thought it, if he could come by any course that enclosure to enter, to harbour in that hostel while the holy day lasted with delight, he called, and there came with speed a porter blithe and bright. On the wall he learned his need, and hailed the errant knight. Gawain decides to go up to this castle, to this mansion in the forest that has suddenly appeared, and see if he'd be able to stay there over Christmas. And of course, as soon as the porter sees him and learns of his tale, he welcomes him gladly. Then the lord of that land, leaving his chamber, came mannerly to meet the man on the floor. He said, "You are welcome at your wish to dwell here. What is here, all is your own to have in your rule and sway." "Gramercy," quoth Gawain, "may Christ you this repay." As men that to meet were fain, they both embraced that day. So it turns out that the lord of the house is the nicest guy in the entire world, and he says, "We would be absolutely honored to have somebody like you staying at our castle over Christmas," and they hug. Gawain gazed at the good man who had greeted him kindly, and he thought bold and big was the baron of the castle, very large and long, and his life at the prime. Broad and bright was his beard, all beaver-hued, stern, strong in his stance upon stalwart legs. His face fell as fire, and frank in his speech, and well it suited him in sooth, as it seemed to the knight, a lordship to lead untroubled over lieges trusty. This lord, he seems like a solid guy. He's cool, he's handsome, and seems just like a really good person. So they give him his own room, they dress him in beautiful robes, and they lead him to a delicious feast. Then inquiry and question were carefully put, touching personal points to the prince himself, till he courteously declared that to the court he belonged, that high Arthur in honour held in his sway, who was the right royal king of the Round Table, and 'twas Gawain himself that as their guest now sat, and had come for that Christmas, as the case had turned out. Of course, they knew he was a knight, but they didn't know he was that kind of a knight. This is basically a celebrity staying at their house for Christmas at this point, so they are all incredibly excited about it. And of course, after the feast, they all head off to Mass, because they all go to Mass every day, and this one is extra special because it's Christmas. The Lord seizes him by the sleeve and to a seat leads him, kindly acknowledges him and calls him by name, saying that most welcome he was of all the guests in the world, and he grateful thanks gave him and greeted the other, and they sat together soberly while the service lasted. Once Mass is over, the Lord's wife comes out of the separate space where she was sitting for Mass with her ladies. Then the lady longed to look at the knight, and from her closet she came with many comely maidens. She was fairer in face, in her flesh and her skin, her proportions, her complexion, her port than all others, and more lovely than Guinevere to Gawain she looked. He came through the chancel to pay court to her grace. Leading her by the left hand, another lady was there, who was older than she, indeed ancient she seemed, and held high in honor by all men about her. But unlike in their looks those ladies appeared, for if the younger was youthful, yellow was the elder. With rose hue the one face was richly mantled, rough cheeks wrinkled and rolled on the other. The lady of the house, the Lord's wife, is beautiful and glamorous, and on her left side is an old lady who is not as beautiful, according to Gawain. Of course, Gawain, being the good guy that he is, first greets the old lady when he approaches, as chivalry would demand. And then about the lovelier he laid then lightly his arms, and kissed her in courtly wise with courtly speaking. His acquaintance they requested, and quickly he begged, to be their servant in sooth, if so they desired. They took him between them, and talking they led him, to the fireside in a fair room, and first of all called for spices which men sped without sparing to bring them, and ever wine therewith well to their liking. So suffice to say, these ladies are quite fond of Gawain, and they're treating him very well. Thus with laughter and jollity the lord made his jests to gladden Sir Gawain with games that night in the hall. Until the time was due that the lord for light should call, Sir Gawain with leave withdrew, and went to bed withal. The next day is Christmas, because that was Christmas Eve, which means they have an even cooler feast. And throughout all the jolliness of this feast, it seems that Gawain and the lady of the house are getting along particularly well. Yet I ween that Gawain and the woman so fair, in companionship took such pleasure together, in sweet society, soft words speaking, their courteous converse clean and clear of all evil, that with their pleasant pastime no prince's sport compares. They're not talking about anything inappropriate or anything, but they are getting along famously. That day grows late, and when it is so late that it is in fact the next day, the lord pulls Gawain aside. Good day then, said Gawain, trying to go to bed. But the good man stayed him, and led him to his own chamber, to the chimney corner, and there delayed him, and lovingly thanked him for the pride and pleasure his presence had brought, for so honouring his house at that high season, and deigning his dwelling to adorn with his favour. And he asks Gawain what he's doing out here in the cold on Christmas Day travelling. At first Gawain is reluctant to answer because he doesn't want to cause a fuss, but then he realizes that he does need to find the Green Chapel within like the next week or two. So he says, "Can you tell me in truth if tale you ever heard of the Green Chapel, on what ground it may stand, and of the great knights that guard it, all green by his colour?" He says he needs to get there by New Year's. "For my business I have now but barely 3 days, and I would fainer fall dead than fail at my errand." Then laughing said the lord, "Now linger you must, for when 'tis time to that tryst, I will teach you the road. On what ground is the Green Chapel, let it grieve you no more." Despite the fact that Gawain needs to find this Green Chapel in the next 3 days, the lord says, "Chill out, you're fine. I know exactly where it is, and when the time comes, I'll tell you where it is. So you can just hang out here for the next couple of days, and then I'll lead you directly to the Green Chapel. In your bed you shall be, sir, till broad is the day, without fret and then fare on the first of the year. And come to the mark at mid-morn there, to make what play you know. Remain till New Year's Day, then rise and riding go. We'll set you on your way, 'tis but 2 miles or so." So it turns out that this lord's castle is only 2 miles away from the Green Chapel. But Gawain doesn't need to leave yet and can stay and rest for a while because he can just leave New Year's morning and be there right on time. Then was Gawain delighted, and in gladness he laughed. "Now I thank you 1,000 times for this beyond all. Now my quest is accomplished as you crave it. I will dwell a few days here, and else do what you order." Gawain is so grateful. He's happy to stay for as long as he possibly can. And since Gawain has then promised to do whatever the lord would like, the lord explains that he is going to be going out hunting the next couple of mornings, but he wants Gawain to stay back and not join the hunt. "One thing more," said the master, "we'll make an agreement. Whatever I win in the wood at once shall be yours, and whatever gain you may get, you shall give in exchange. Shall we swap thus, sweet man? Come say what you think, whether one's luck be light or one's lot be better." "By God," quoth good Gawain, "I agree to it all, and whatever play you propose seems pleasant to me." So the lord has proposed an interesting Christmas game. And of course, Gawain is going to agree to it because he apparently agrees to all Christmas games, no matter how ominous they seem. But honestly, this seems like a pretty sweet deal coming from the lord. The lord is going to go out hunting, and whatever he hunts, whatever he gets while he's out hunting, he's going to bring it back and give it to Gawain. And all that Gawain has to do is, even though he's sitting at home, unlikely to gain anything, whatever it is that he gains throughout the day, he has to give back to the lord in exchange for the hunt. It seems like you really can't lose. "By God," quoth good Gawain, "I agree to it all, and whatever play you propose seems pleasant to me." "Done, 'tis a bargain. Who will bring us a drink?" So said the lord of that land. They go on to describe the hunt the next morning, which seems pretty vicious. They're after a couple of deer that are playing very hard to get. But back at home, Gawain is lying in bed, and as in slumber he strayed, he heard stealthily come a soft sound at his door as it secretly opened, and from under the clothes he craned then his head, A corner of the curtain he caught up a little, and looked that way warily, to learn what it was. It was the lady of the house herself, most lovely to see, that cautiously closed the door quietly behind her, and drew near to his bed. Then abashed was the knight, and lay down swiftly to look as if he slept, and she stepped silently and stole to his bed, cast back the curtain, and crept then within, and sat her down softly on the side of the bed, and there lingered very long to look for his waking. So the lady of the house sneaks into Gawain's room, and of course he pretends to be asleep, which is a problem because then she's just sitting there and waiting for him to wake up, which is a little awkward for him. He lay there lurking a long while and wondered, and mused in his mind how the matter would go, to what point it might pass to some surprise he fancied. Yet he said to himself, more seemly 'twould be, in due course with questions, to inquire what she wishes. So he realizes it's kind of a coward's way out to pretend to be asleep, and that he should probably check what she wants. Then rousing he rolled over, and round to her turning, he lifted his eyelids with a look as of wonder, and signed him with the cross, thus safer to be kept aright. With chin and cheeks so sweet, of blended red and white, with grace then him did greet, small lips with laughter bright. "Good morning, Sir Gawain," said that gracious lady. "You are a careless sleeper if one can creep on you so." Gawain is obviously surprised to see her and asks if she could, leave for a bit, because she's sitting on his bed and he wants to get dressed. But she says that no, it's fine, you don't need to get dressed. No one's going to catch us. To my body will you welcome be, of delight to take your fill, for need constraineth me to serve you, and I will. She is offering him her body to delight and take his fill. "Upon my word," said Gawain, "that is well, I guess, though I am not now he of whom you are speaking to attain such honor as here you tell me of. I am a knight unworthy, as well indeed I know. By God, I would be glad if good to you seemed whatever I could say, or in service could offer to the pleasure of your excellence. It would be pure delight." She's saying, if you're such a brave, bold, and lusty knight, why don't you come over here and take me? And he's saying, no, I'm not that brave, or bold, or lusty. So I'm not sure if there's really anything I can do for you. "In good faith, Sir Gawain," said the gracious lady, "the prowess and excellence that all others approve. If I scorned and decried them, it were scant courtesy. But there are ladies in number who liever would now have thee in their hold, sir, as I have thee here, pleasantly to play with in polished converse, their solace to seek and their sorrows to soothe, than great part of the goods or gold that they own." So she's saying, there are women that would pay a lot to be in the position that I am in with you now, to talk to you. But I thank him who on high of heaven is Lord, that I have here so wholly in my hand all what I desire by grace. She was an urgent wooer, that lady of face, the knights with speeches pure, replied in every case. It has become obvious that the lady of the house is trying desperately to seduce Gawain, who, because she is the Lord's wife and because they're not married, he is continuing to, we'll say, rebuff her advances. Instead, they just have a nice chat. Thus of many matters they spoke till mid-morn was past, and ever the lady demeaned her as one that loved him much, and he fenced with her featly, ever flawless in manner. Though I were lady most lovely, thought the lady to herself, the less love would he bring here, since he looked for his bane that blow, that him so soon should grieve, and needs it must be so. Then the lady asked for leave, at once he let her go. She asks if she can go, and of course he says yes, because, well, he didn't even really want her there in the first place, even though she is pretty. Gawain is not offended by her advances, but he's just far too good of a person to be a homewrecker. The lady basically says that there is not a singular knight in the land that would be in the position that Gawain is in right now and not at least kiss the lady that he's with. Then said Gawain, "Very well, as you wish it be done. I will kiss at your command as becometh a knight, and more lest he displease you, so plead it no longer." We see this very interesting overlap here of his morals and chivalry and what the chivalric custom demands, because it's kind of rude for her to ask for a kiss and him not to give it, but then it's also morally wrong because she's married to somebody else, etc., etc. Basically, Gawain resolves this by giving her one single kiss. And after this kiss, he gets up and he goes to mass, and then he hangs out with the ladies for the rest of the day. Meanwhile, the lord of the house, while Gawain and his wife are talking, is cleaning up the hunt from the day, and it is described rather gruesomely. Next, they slit the slot, seized on the arbor, shaved it with a sharp knife, and shore away the grease. Next, ripped the four limbs and rent off the hide. Then they broke open the belly, the bowels they removed, flinging them nimbly afar. And the flesh of the knot they grasped, then the gorge, disengaging with skill the weasand from the windpipe, and did away with the guts. So while Gawain and the lady are being described with all of this very flowery language, the lord of the house is engaging in this truly gory experience. They burst open the breast and broke it apart, and next at the gorge one begins thereupon, cuts up all quickly till he comes to the fork. You know, they're describing the blood and the gore and the bones cracking open. But that contrast is very, very important. When the daylight was done, they all duly were come into the noble castle, where quietly the knight abode, in bliss by the bright fire set. Thither the lord now strode, when Gawain with him was met, then free all pleasure flowed. The lord then proudly shows Gawain the venison that they've caught. How does this play please you? Have I praise deserved? Have I earned by mine art the heartiest thanks? Yea, verily, Gawain averred. Here is the venison the fairest that I've seen in 7 years in the season of winter. And I give it to you all, Gawain, said the good man at once. For as our covenant accorded, you may claim it as your own. That is true, he returned, and I tell you the same. What of worth within these walls I have won also. With as good will, I warrant, 'tis awarded to you. His fair neck he enfolded, then fast in his arms, and kissed him with all the kindness that his courtesy knew. There take you my gain, sir, I got nothing more. I would give it up gladly, if even greater it were. That is a good one, quoth the good man, the lord of the house. Greatly I thank you. 'Tis such maybe that you had better briefly now tell me, where you won this same wealth by the wits you possess. That was not the covenant, quoth Gawain. Do not question me more, for you've drawn what is due to you, no doubt can you have 'tis true. They laugh, and with voices fair, their merriment pursue, and to supper soon repair, with many dainties new. According to the terms of the deal, the lord has brought Gawain the hunt, and Gawain has given him the thing that he won. The lord, of course, asks Gawain where he got this kiss, but Gawain is under no obligation to answer, and he does not. Later by the chimney in the chamber they were seated, abundant wine of the best was brought to them oft, and again as a game they agreed on the morrow to abide by the same bond as they had bargained before. Chance what might chance to exchange all their trade, whatever new thing they got when they gathered at night. The next day the lord leaves early for the hunt once again, and this time they are hunting pigs. And of course, back at home, the lady shows up in Gawain's bedchamber once again. She of course turns on the charm immediately, trying once again to seduce Gawain. And he says, Indeed by God, quoth Gawain, you graciously speak, but force finds no favor among the folk where I dwell, and any gift not given gladly and freely. He says, I don't want to make you seem rude by saying that you're forcing this kiss upon me, so I am at your calling command to kiss when you please, and you may receive as you desire, and cease as you think in place. Then down the lady bent, and sweetly kissed his face. Much speech then there they spent, of lovers' grief and grace. So once again, the lady is using the rules of chivalry in order to manipulate Gawain, because he doesn't want to make her look bad by denying her kiss and saying that she's forcing it upon him, and so they kiss again. And this exchange continues, you know, they're bantering back and forth, and then as she's leaving, they laughed and long they played, at last she him then kissed, with grace adieu she bade, and went whereso she list. This time, she kissed him when they first started talking, and they kissed goodbye. The lord slays the boar that has been terrorizing everyone on the hunt. The lord with his loud voice and laughter merry, gaily he greeted him when Gawain he saw. The fair ladies were fetched and the folk all assembled, and he showed them the shorn slabs and shaped his report of the width and the wondrous length and the wickedness also in war of the wild swine, as in the woods he had fled. With fair words his friend the feat then applauded, and praised the great prowess he had proved in his deeds. For such brawn on a beast, the brave knight declared, or such sides on a swine he had never seen before. Then they handled the huge head, and highly he praised it, showing horror at the hideous thing to honor the Lord. Now, Gawain, said the good man, the game is your own. By close covenant we concluded, as clearly you know. That is true, he returned, and as truly I assure you, all my winnings I warrant I shall award you in exchange. He clasped his neck, and courteously a kiss he then gave him, and swiftly with a second he served him on the spot. Now we are quits, he quoth, and clear for this evening of all covenants we accorded, since I came to this house, as is due. The Lord said, by Saint Giles, your match I never knew. You'll be wealthy in a while, such trade if you pursue. Once again, the exchange has been given fairly. Gawain got the hunt, and the Lord got both of the kisses that Gawain was given. They go to have supper, but of course, Gawain and the lady seem to have somewhat of a connection. Such glances she gave him of her gracious favor, secretly stealing sweet looks, that strong man to charm, that he was passing perplexed and ill-pleased at heart. Yet he would fain not of his courtesy coldly refuse her, but graciously engaged her, however against the grain the play. Gawain isn't comfortable with what's happening. I mean, he's attracted to the lady, but he doesn't want to betray his own morality, but he's also being bound by not making her look rude by the chivalric customs, and he's just been put in a very, very difficult place. Around comes New Year's Eve, and they engage in this deal once more. And this time the hunt is for a fox, a reynard, as they're called, which comes from another 14th century story, and I didn't know that. Fox is derived from the French word for fox, but reynard came into use because of a tale where there was a fox named Reynard, and I just think that's interesting. And of course, back at home, as we have now come to expect, Gawain wakes up to the lady once again entering his chambers. She seduces him and they kiss 3 times. This time she uses the argument of saying, like, are you in love with another person? And Gawain can't lie, so he says no, he's not in love with another person. The knight said, by St. John, and softly gave a smile, nay, a lover have I none, and none will have meanwhile. That's probably the strongest outright statement that he has made, saying, none will have meanwhile, I will not have a lover meanwhile, outright denying the lady, which is the most blatant thing he's done. So she kisses him that 3rd time as a goodbye, and then says, now, my dear, at this parting, do me this pleasure. Give me something as thy gift, thy glove it might be, that I may remember thee, dear man, my morning to lesson. So it would be traditional that the knight would have a gift for the lady who he's been talking to every single day. Gawain has been on the road. He doesn't have anything except for his dirty horse gear. He wasn't expecting to run into a lady to whom he would have to give a gift. But the lady doesn't seem to mind this. She says, said she so comely clad, nay noble knight and free, though naught of yours I had, you should get a gift from me. She says, it's fine that you don't have a gift to give to me, but I would like to give a gift to you. A rich ring she offered him, of red gold fashioned, with a stone like a star standing up clear, that bore brilliant beams as bright as the sun. But Gawain, who has nothing to give her in return, as would be the chivalric custom, says, I will have no gifts for God of your grace at this time. I have none to return you, and naught will I take. She proffered it, and pressed him, and he her pleading refused, and swore swiftly upon his word, that accepted would he not. And she, sorry that he refused, said to him further, if to my ring you say nay, since too rich it appears, and you would not so deeply be indebted to me, I shall give you my girdle. Less gain will that be. She says, okay, well if you won't take this shiny gold ring, at least you'll take my girdle, my belt. Fashioned it was of green silk and with gold finished, though only braided round bout, embroidered by hand. And this she would give to Gawain, and gladly besought him, of no worth though it were, to be willing to take it. So the ring had monetary value, but this girdle, this belt, doesn't. So she says, will you at least take this gift? And he said, nay, he would not. He would never receive either gold or jewelry ere God the grace sent him to accomplish the quest on which he had come thither. And therefore I pray you please not be angry. So he says, no, I can't even take that as a gift. But then she explains, for whoever goes girdled with this green riband, while he keeps it well clasped closely about him, there is none so hardy under heaven that to hew him were able, for he could not be killed by any cunning of hand. This isn't just a girdle, this is a magical girdle that, if it is tied about him, will protect him from being injured by any blow. The knight then took note, and thought now in his heart, what would be a prize in that peril that was appointed to him? When he gained the Green Chapel to get there his sentence, if by some sleight he was not slain, 'twould be a sovereign device. So he realizes that he might be able to use this girdle in order to trick himself out of this beheading game, because he's always just assumed he was going to go to the Green Chapel and die, but now he might have a chance. Then he bore her with rebuke and debated not her words, and she pressed on him the belt and proffered it in earnest. And he agreed, and she gave it very gladly indeed, and prayed him for her sake to part with it never, but on his honor to hide it from her husband. And he then agreed, that no one should ever know, nay, none in the world but they. With earnest heart and mood, great thanks he oft did say. She then the knight so good, a third time kissed that day. Gawain has gotten himself into an interesting position here, because he has accepted a gift from her without gifting anything in return, which is a breach of chivalric customs. And he's doing it because he's afraid for his life. The lady was never able to fully seduce him, but she was able to seduce him with a desire to live. He doesn't want to die. He wants to win this beheading game. And I think more importantly, she has also asked him to keep it a secret from the Lord. He puts on the girdle after she leaves, he hides it, and then he goes to confession to cleanse him of his sins and get some advice from a priest. The Lord returns from the fox hunt, but before he can give Gawain the hunt from the day, Gawain clasped then the knight and kisses him thrice, as long and deliciously as he could lay upon him. By Christ, the other quoth, you have come by a fortune. In winning such wares were they worth what you paid? Indeed, the price was not important, promptly he answered, whereas plainly is paid now the profit I gained. Marry, said the other man, mine is not up to it, for I've hunted all this day, and naught else have I got, but this foul fox fell, the fiend have the goods, and that price is very poor to pay for such treasures as these you have thrust upon me, 3 such kisses so good. 'Tis enough then, said Gawain, and I thank you by the rood. And how the fox was slain, he told them as they stood. Gawain has gifted the Lord the 3 kisses in exchange for the hunt of the day, but he has said nothing of the girdle, which was inevitably another thing that he received that day. But either way, the next day time is up. It's New Year's, and he must say goodbye to this household that he has spent all of Christmas in. They send him with a servant to guide his way the 2 miles to the knight's chapel, and they load up Gringolet and arm him and send him off wearing the girdle. By the time they draw near to the chapel, the servant that is with him begins begging Gawain not to go, because he doesn't want him to die and they all admire him so much. But reluctantly, he tells Gawain the way to the Green Chapel. Gawain urged on his horse then and came up to the mound, there lightly alit and lashed to a tree. His reins with rough branch rightly secured them. Then he went to the barrow, and about it he walked, debating in his mind what the thing might be. It had a hole at the end and at either side, and with grass and green patches was grown all over, and was hollow within, naught but an old cavern, or a cleft in an old crag, he could not it name aright. Can this be the Green Chapel, O Lord, said the gentle knight, here the devil might say, I ween, his matins about midnight. So he's been brought to the place where they say that the Green Chapel is, but all he finds is a mound of green earth. He considers giving up, but then he heard from the high hill, in a hard rock wall, beyond the stream on a steep, a sudden startling noise. How it clattered in the cliff, as if to cleave it asunder, as if one upon a grindstone were grinding a scythe. How it whirred and it rasped, as is water in a mill race. How it rushed and it rang, rueful to hearken. Then, by God, quoth Gawain, I guess this ado is meant for my honor, meetly to hail me as a knight. As God wills, waylay away, that helps me not a mite. My life, though down I lay, no noise can me affright. So he's looking for the knight, and he hears a fearsome noise. Then clearly the knight there called out aloud, Who is master of this place to meet me at tryst? For now 'tis good Gawain on ground that here walks. If any aught hath to ask, let him hasten to me, either now or else never, his needs to further. Stay, said one standing above on the steep o'er his head, and thou shalt get in good time what to thee give I vowed. Still, without a rasping and a racket, he rushed on a while, and went back to his wedding till he wished to descend. So it's a little intimidating. Gawain arrives, and he hears a voice, and the Green Knight is sharpening his axe. Awesome. Then the Green Knight strolls out with his new weapon, a massive Danish axe. Gawain, said that green man, may God keep thee. On my word, sir, I welcome thee with a will to my place, and thou hast timed thy travels as trusty man should, and thou hast forgot not the engagement agreed on between us. This time gone a 12-month, thou tookest thy allowance, and I should now this New Year's nimbly repay thee. And we are in this valley now verily on our own. There are no people to part us, we can play as we like. Have thy helm off thy head, and have here thy pay. Bandy me no more debate than I brought before thee, when thou didst sweep off my head with one swipe only. So the knight says, chop chop, enough of this talking. Get down on the ground like I was before, bare your neck to me. With a nod of his neck he bowed, let the bare flesh appear. He would not by dread be cowed, no sign he gave of fear. Now, of course, we should keep in mind that Gawain is still wearing the lady's girdle. Then the great man in green gladly prepared him, gathered up his grim tool there Gawain to smite. With all the lust in his limbs, aloft he heaved it, shaped as a mighty stroke, as if he meant to destroy him. Had it driving come down as dour he aimed it, under his dint would have died the most doughty man ever. But Gawain on that gisarm then glanced to one side, as it down came gliding on the green there to end him, and he shrank a little with his shoulders at the sharp iron. Gawain flinched as the blade was coming down. With a jolt the other man jerked back the blade and reproved them the prince, proudly him taunting. Thou art not Gawain, said the green man, who is so good reported, who never flinched from any foes on fell or in dale, and now thou fleest in fear, ere thou feelest a hurt. Of such cowardice that night I ne'er heard accursed. Neither blenched I nor backed when thy blow thou, sir, aimedest, nor uttered any cavil of the courts of King Arthur. My head flew to my feet, and yet fled I never. But thou, ere thou hast any hurt, in thy heart quailest, and so the nobler knight to be named I deserve therefore. I blenched once, Gawain said, and I will do so no more. But if on floor now falls my head, I cannot it restore. The knight says, I didn't flinch when you cut off my head, and Gawain says, yeah, but I can't put my head back on after it gets cut off. Gawain braces himself. Have at thee then, said the other, and heaved it aloft, and ratched him as wrathfully as if he were wild with rage. He made at him a mighty aim, but the man he touched not, holding back hastily his hand, ere hurt it might do. Gawain warily awaited it, and winced with no limb, but stood still as a stone or the stump of a tree, that with 100 ravelled roots in the rocks is embedded. This time merrily remarked then the man in green, so now thou hast thy heart whole, a hit I must make. May the high order now keep thee that Arthur gave thee, and guard thy gullet as this go, if it can thee that. Lightly his weapon he lifted, and let it down neatly, with the bent horn of the blade towards the neck that was bare. Though he hewed with a hammer swing, he hurt him no more than to snick him on one side and sever the skin. Through the fair fat sank the edge, and the flesh entered, so that the shining blood o'er his shoulders was shed on the earth. And when the good knight saw the gore that gleamed on the snow, he sprang out with spurning feet a spear's length and more. In haste caught his helm, and on his head cast it. Under his fair shield he shot with a shake of his shoulders, brandished his bright sword, and boldly he spake. Never since he as man-child of his mother was born, was he ever on this earth half so happy a man. Have done, sir, with thy dints. Now deal me no more. I have stood from thee a stroke without strife on this spot, and if thou offerest me others, I shall answer thee promptly, and give as good again, and as grim be assured shall pay. But one stroke here's my due, as the covenant clear did say, that in Arthur's hall we drew, and so, good sir, now stray. So, the great blow happens, and it's just a nick on his neck. He sees the blood, he jumps up and basically says, okay, that's it, that's all you got, that's all you're gonna get. Now please go away, because I'm very afraid. From him the other stood off, and on his axe rested, held the haft to the ground, and on the head leaning, gazed at the good knight, as on the green there he strode, to see him standing so stout, so stern there, and fearless, armed and unafraid, his heart it well pleased. Then merrily he spoke with a mighty voice, and loudly it rang as to the Lord he said, Fearless knight on this field, so fierce do not be. No man here unmannerly hath thee maltreated. nor aught given thee not granted by agreement at court. A hack I thee vowed, and thou'st had it, so hold thee content. I remit thee the remnant of all rights I might claim, if I brisker have been, a buffet it may be, if I could have handed thee more harshly, and harm could have done thee. First I menaced thee in play, with no more than a trial, and clove thee with no cleft. I had claim to the faint, for the fast pact we affirmed on the first evening, and thou fairly and unfailingly didst faith with me keep. All thy gains me thou gavest, as good man ought. The other trial for the morning, man, I thee tendered, when thou kissedst my comely wife, and the kisses didst render. For the two here I offered, only two harmless feints to make. The true shall truly repay, for no peril then need he quake. Thou didst fail on the third day, and so that tap now take. The Green Knight sits back and laughs, because it turns out he is the Lord from the castle. He speaks of his comely wife and the kisses they exchanged, and he explains that he falsely swung the axe twice because on those first 2 days, Gawain gave him everything that he was given, 1 kiss and then 2 kisses the next day, and he fully upheld the bargain. But on that third day, on that third stroke, Gawain did lie a little bit by hiding the girdle, and so the knight and the lord of the house cut him a little bit. He explains that the girdle that Gawain is wearing, in fact, is his. Now I am aware of thy kisses and thy courteous ways, and of thy wooing my wife, I worked that myself. I sent her to test thee, and thou seemst to me truly the fair knight most faultless that e'er set foot on the earth. But in this you lacked, sir, a little, and of loyalty came short, but that was for no artful wickedness, nor for wooing either, but because you loved your own life, the less do I blame you. Everything that happened at the house, all the ladies' seduction, the whole game that they played, it was a test. It was a test from the Green Knight, who was the Lord, in order to check out whether Gawain really was as faithful of a knight as he claimed to be. And it seems that the Lord is pretty happy with the turnout, because Gawain was not swayed by lust. And indeed, there were some conflicts of chivalry versus, morals. And he chose the more chivalrous option, which was to kiss her, which was a little bit amoral, but she was never able to fully seduce him. The only way that she was able to seduce him was with the promise that he would live, and the knight really struggles to fault Gawain for wanting to survive. The other stern knight, Gawain, in a study then stood a long while. In such grief and disgust he had grew in his heart, all the blood from his breast and his blush mingled, that he shrank into himself with shame at that speech. The first words on that field that he found then to say were, "Cursed be ye, coveting and cowardice also." He's talking to himself here. "In you, vileness and vice that virtue destroyeth." He took then the treacherous thing, the girdle, and untying the knot, fiercely flung he the belt at the feet of the knight. "See there the falsifier, and foul be its fate. Through care for thy blow, cowardice brought me to consent to coveting my true kind to forsake, which is freehand and faithful words that are fitting to knights. Now I am faulty and false, who afraid have been ever of treachery and troth breach. The two now my curse may bear. I confess, sir, here to you, all my faulty has been my fair. Let me gain your grace anew, and after I will be aware." Gawain is pretty hard on himself, saying that he is vile and treacherous because of what he's done. Then the other man laughed and lightly answered, "I hold it healed beyond doubt, the harm that I had. Thou hast confessed thee so clean, and acknowledged thine errors, and hast the penance plain to see from the point of my blade, that I hold thee purged of that debt, and made pure and as clean as hadst thou done no ill deed, since the day thou wert born." Even though Gawain is tearing himself apart for this mistake he's made, the knight says, "It's okay, you have confessed it, you were honest with me now, and so I forgive you of your sins. And I give thee, sir, the girdle with gold at its hems, for it is green like my gown. So, Sir Gawain, you may think of this our contest, when in the throng thou walkest among princes of high praise. 'Twill be a plain reminder of the chance of the Green Chapel between chivalrous knights." So the knight says, "It's okay, you're clear, I forgive you, you've confessed your sins, and you are pure and clean, but you should keep the girdle with you. Take the belt with you and continue wearing it, because as you walk among princes and continue living your chivalrous life, it will be a reminder to you to keep your word and stay faithful and true. And then, of course, the Lord invites Gawain back to his house for celebrating New Year's. Nay, forsooth, the knight said, and seized then his helm, and duly it doffed, and the doughty man thanked. I have lingered too long, may your life now be blessed, and he promptly repay you, who apportions all honors. Gawain says, no, I have to get home. I've stayed too long, I can't stay and celebrate. But before Gawain leaves, he asks the Lord one more thing. How do you announce your true name? And then nothing further. So before, the Green Knight refused to give him his name, and he never found out the Lord's name when he was living with him. There is a very particular power to names, one that Tolkien was really obsessed with. Check out my video about names if you're interested in that. But the name is deeply connected to the thing that it names, but especially for Feyfolk, for fairy, which it is assumed that the Green Man is part of, the name is particularly important. So that is the last thing that Gawain wants from him. Gawain is basically saying, okay, all games aside, who actually are you? That I will tell thee truly, then returned the other. Bertilac de Hout desert, hereabouts I am called. By the might of Morgan le Fay, in that mansion dwelleth, and by cunning of lore and crafts well learned. She made me go in guise to your goodly court, to put its pride to the proof, if the reports were true, that runs of the great renown of the Round Table. She put this magic upon me to deprive you of your wits, in hope Guinevere to hurt, that she in horror might die, aghast at that glamoury that gruesomely spake, with its head in its hand before the high table. So it turns out that Bertilac de Hout desert, who is Lord Bertilac, who's been behind this whole thing, behind him is Morgan le Fay, a sorceress in King Arthur's court. I believe she plays an antagonist role in a lot of Arthurian tales, and she did this whole thing just to test them, to see if the finest knight of King Arthur's court was really so fine. Lord Bertilac invites Gawain back to his house once again, saying, we'll celebrate with Morgan le Fay, but Gawain, no, he wants to go home. Wild ways in the world Gawain now rideth, on green Galette by the grace of God he still lived. Oft in house he was harboured, and lay oft in the open, oft vanquished his foes in adventures as he fared, which I intend not this time in my tale to recount. The hurt was healed that he had in his neck, and the bright-hued belt he bore now about it. He rides back to Camelot wearing the green belt around his neck as a marker. And so at last he came to the court again safely. Delight there was awakened when the lords were aware that good Gawain had returned. Glad news they thought it. The king kissed the knight and the queen also, and then in turn many a true knight that attended to greet him. About his quest they inquire, and he recounts all the marvels, declares all the hardships and care that he had, what chanced at the chapel, what cheer made the knight, the love of the lady and the lace at the last. The notch in his neck, naked he showed them, that he had for his dishonesty from the hands of the knight to blame. It was torment to tell the truth. In his face the blood did flame, he groaned for grief and ruth, when he showed it to his shame. Gawain comes home, and he tells the whole story, warts and all, including why he has the nick in his neck and how he did wrong. He tells them about the girdle, saying, Lo, Lord, he said at last, and the lace the girdle handled. This is the band. For this rebuke I bear my neck. This is the grief disgrace I have got for myself, from the covetousness and cowardice that o'ercame me there. This is the token of the troth breach that I am detected in, and needs must I wear it while in the world I remain. For a man may cover his blemish, but unbind it he cannot. For where once 'tis applied, then part will it never. The king comforted the knight, and all the court also, laughed loudly thereat, and this law made in mirth. The lords and the ladies that whoso belonged to the table, every knight of the brotherhood a baldric should have, a band of bright green obliquely about him, and this for love of that knight as a livery should wear, for that was reckoned the distinction of the Round Table, and honor was his that had it evermore after, as it is written in the best of the books of romance. Despite how ashamed Gawain was to tell his tale of his failure, Arthur decrees that every knight of the Round Table will now wear a band of green in order to represent this story, to show that even the most perfect knight has his faults occasionally. Thus in Arthur his days happened this marvel, as the Book of the Brute beareth us witness. Since Brutus the bold knight to Britain came first, After the siege and the assault had ceased at Troy, I trow, many a marvel such before has happened here ere now, to his bliss us bring who bore the crown of thorns on brow. Amen. And that was the tale of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. First off, just to speak of the translation, you don't get better than Tolkien, and I do like a number of other translations, and some people criticize the Tolkien version for being a little bit too flowery and difficult to understand, and I don't know, maybe I'm just really cool, or I've just been reading a decent amount of Shakespeare and other Tolkien stuff. It's not that difficult to understand for me, and I think that having this slightly elevated, slightly purple prose helps remind you that this isn't just another story, you know? This is a story pulled far, far from history that's meant to feel like verse. It's not meant to feel like you're reading someone's diary. It is meant to feel like a story, like a song, like a tale. And I think that the elevated language that Tolkien uses serves that purpose really well. While still making it comprehensible, he maintains a lot of the poetic essence of the story. This copy of the story that I have also includes a lecture that Tolkien gave about Gawain, so we'll discuss a couple of points and quotes from that, even though I won't read you the whole thing. Because this is a story that you can draw so many different meanings from, depending on the translation, really. The meaning that Tolkien was going for is really shapes the story as we have it here. And Tolkien believes that the crux of this tale is the temptation between Gawain and the lady and the moral quandary that he gets into there. Obviously, the most spectacular moment of the story is the knight riding into the court holding his own severed head. It's all very macabre and stunning, of course, and Christmassy. I guess if that's your version of Christmas. But I do agree that the real story starts once he's reached this lord's house, because that's the point where it's a test. When the Green Knight rode into the court, he was just looking for a candidate to test. But once Gawain already makes the decision to go out and seek the Green Knight, even though he didn't have to, you know, it was just good gamesmanship, basically, that he went to seek this knight out and fulfill his end of the bargain. But Gawain proves himself then by accepting the deal, and then by actually going through on his word and seeking out the Green Chapel. So by the time he reaches the Lord's house, they know that this is a good candidate for them to be testing. And Tolkien believes that there are 3 levels of rules, sort of, that Gawain is trying to work through. On one level, the first most simple level, is that of the game. He is signing up for these games. He agrees to the rules pretty expressly, that he will be able to strike 1 blow on the Green Knight, get his fancy axe, and then a year and a day from then, the Green Knight will reciprocate that blow. So that is the first level of gamesmanship. And then there is another game introduced when he is in the house of Lord Bertilac, this game of exchanges. So that's the first level, that Gawain feels honor-bound to respect the rules of the game. The second level of rules is slightly more important than the rules of the game, and that is the law of chivalry. There was never one specific chivalric code that was honored by all knights in the medieval world, but there were some general ideals that all of them tried to uphold in order to, you know, keep from returning to savagery. And these included not wanting to seem rude, seeming pious, respectful, especially to ladies. You didn't want to put ladies in awkward positions to make them feel uncomfortable or forced. And so beyond just having to operate within the rules of the game, Gawain is also trying to operate within these rules of chivalry, which means that he can't make the lady look bad, that he doesn't want to make her uncomfortable or make her seem like she's being too demanding. So that is the second level of rules that Gawain is operating in. And then, of course, at the very core of it, the most important set of rules that trumps all of these is Christian morality. Gawain is distinctly Christian in his morality. He doesn't want to sin, he doesn't want to be seen as unpious, and it's not just because he doesn't want to disobey the rules of the game or seem unchivalrous, it's because he's a very, very devout Christian. So as you can see, this test really tests all of these 3 levels, and not only that, but it puts them at odds with each other. On a moral front, Gawain cannot sleep with the lady of the house because she's married and because they are not married. That would go against all Christian morals. morals, but on the level of chivalry, he can't outright deny her, and so he's put in a very precarious position, and we learn a lot about how Gawain operates in the world, what rules he follows, and what rules he holds to more importance. His personal values are an enmeshment of trying to follow the rules of the game, following the rules of chivalry, and following Christian morals, and so we meet this very complex character, and this gives us a glimpse at what the people of this time may have been facing, how they were all operating within these different webs of rules, trying to decipher the best way to live. And of course, when it comes down to what Gawain's sin was, the only rule that he broke out of all of these different spheres of rules that he could have broken was a rule of a game. You know, he didn't tell Lord Bertilac about the sash, and the sash itself wasn't a sin. Protecting yourself from harm isn't a sin, and he wasn't breaking chivalric codes. It was just the rules of the game that he was breaking. And even then, when he did break the rules of the game, he flagellates himself. He throws himself down, saying that he's vile and worthless. And that is why Lord Bertilac is able to forgive him, because of all of the sins that he could have committed, Gawain is negotiating this in the best way he possibly could have to cause the least damage possible. And in the end, it's hard to fault a man for not wanting to die while playing a stupid Christmas game. Tolkien's tale definitely lingers very heavily on this idea of morality. He wanted to prove a very particular moral point with this story, but there are a lot of different interpretations and facets of this story that we can look at. For example, one of the most compelling readings to me is to look at this as industrialization versus nature. And I'm almost a little bit surprised that Tolkien didn't bring this up more in his interpretation of the story, because it's a theme that comes up all the time in his own writing. But the Green Knight is very notably green, and this isn't incidental. Everything about him evokes nature. Indeed, a lot of people compare him to the Green Man of Celtic mythology, a sort of primordial god who was representative of all things wild and growing. Not only is this knight physically green, but he dwells in the Green Chapel, and in order to get to the Green Chapel, you have to pass through the wilderness. It's clear to a certain degree that this is a story about the man-made nature of King Arthur's court and all of their morals and their rule sets, as opposed to the wildness of the natural world. The Green Knight represents a force that none of them fully understand. He is something fey, he is something strange and incomprehensible. He's trying to determine whether Gawain will hold fast to these man-made rules. And in the end, Gawain has to find a happy medium. He cannot be the perfection of all of these rules encompassed into one person. He cannot be perfect in his morality, in his chivalry. He cannot be the perfect knight. And in the wild, through the Green Knight, he finds a happy medium. He learns which of these rules he can hold steadfast to and which he would like to stay steadfast to, even if he's not always able to. And by bringing the green sash home with him and bringing that into King Arthur's court, it is an admission by King Arthur and all of the knights who wear the green sash that they know they can't always be perfect, that they have to understand that they will always have to find a medium between their man-made rules and their perfection and their ideals and the reality of the truly wild world. That's basically just two interpretations, and they kind of interweave with each other, but you could make 100 different arguments on what this story is about. I dare say that every interpretation, every adaptation of it will come up with something slightly different. Just a couple years ago, the movie Sir Gawain and the Green Knight came out. I think that was what it's called. I'll put its poster here, and you guys will recognize it. And that was a really, really solid movie. I won't say it was the cleanest adaptation of this book. They make a lot of changes, but they pulled out some super, super interesting threads about the character of Gawain and what it means to make a name, what it means to make a story for yourself. And that is also certainly an aspect of this, because if you remember, Gawain goes into this not knowing who he is, not feeling like he's a proper knight, and by the end, he is being accepted into the court and is one of the most famous knights of the Round Table. That film is very dark and very confusing, but if you're looking for a kind of edgier interpretation of the story that still does bring out some very interesting themes, I do recommend that movie, and I need to rewatch it because I've only seen it once, and I would very much like to rewatch it. I will say this is an interesting story to adapt because the story at its essence is fairly simple. It's pretty short. There's really only two like major events and locations, the court of King Arthur, and then we skip over the entire journey just to go to the temptation in the house of Lord Bertilac. And so within that, there is so much room to play with the story, and really old stories like this that we keep coming back to are such a great place to play with that. And I think Tolkien was aware of that in the way that this story fits very neatly into the cauldron of story, which was his idea that every story we write gets dropped into the cauldron of story and broken down into its component parts, and storytellers pick up pieces of that and reshape them in their own stories and put them back forever changed in the cultural consciousness. And Sir Gawain and the Green Knight and Arthurian myth as a whole is one of those stories that has been changed again and again, and people keep finding new things to learn about it. And I just think it's really neat, and I love Tolkien's treatment of this story. I don't know if this was the most Christmassy video ever. I figure that this takes place at Christmas, and I always get Christmassy vibes from it. And so hopefully this was Christmassy enough to appease all of you. This is a story that's fairly new to me. I think I had a picture book that I looked at once or twice that was about this story, but there was a lot of blood in it for a children's picture book, so I got a little bit scared and put it down. But I would love to know if you guys have had previous experiences with this story. Did you grow up with it? What translations, what versions have you read? And I would love to hear if you guys have any thoughts about filmic adaptations of this story and which one is your favorite. And if this was your first experience with the story, let me know in the comments what you thought, whether or not you figured out that Lord Bertilac was the Green Knight, because I definitely did not figure that out on my first read through. I had so much fun looking into the story. I really love medieval poetry and I want to read more of it, so it was an absolute pleasure to get to share this tale with you guys. Since this is my last video coming out until Christmas, I feel the need to say thank you to all of you who come here and watch my videos every week. This has been a crazy year for me for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons are you guys and the support that you've given me in order to do the things that I love. Saying that it is a dream come true does not do it justice. So I just want to say thank you to all of you. I hope that you all have a warm and safe holiday season, and most importantly, a very happy, hobbity day.